Welcome back to Z-Speed, and thanks for tuning back in. Today I'm going to show you how to get a leak-free exhaust, whether you're changing out your catalytic converters to test pipes, swapping out your Y pipe, or even a catback exhaust. We're going to grab some brand new hardware and gaskets and some ultra copper gasket maker and show you how to get a leak-free exhaust every single time. So if you're interested in something like that, just stay tuned and we'll get right on it. So today we'll be replacing the hardware and gaskets on these aftermarket test pipes, but the idea is the same for an aftermarket Y pipe or a catback exhaust. We're going to try to get a leak-free system here. Now let's talk about some of the reasons you might run into exhaust leaks when you're using aftermarket exhaust components. Right in front of you, you can see here, I've got my stock catalytic converters, minus my Y pipe here. You can see my mid pipe and then my muffler. This is the stock components for the 350Z, but they all have one thing in common. They are all created at the same factory. We're talking about the Nissan factory, and they were designed by the Nissan engineers with very tight tolerances here. So everything mates up perfectly. All the flanges are designed to work together. Even though you don't see my Y pipe here, that's supposed to mate up perfectly to this mid pipe, and then the mid pipe mates up perfectly to the muffler here. So all you really needed here was some gaskets and hardware, and everything was going to come up leak-free at the factory because it was all designed as a single unit, and that's why you really see any type of leaks when you're talking about a OEM exhaust system. So when you start adding aftermarket components like this Tomei exhaust here, or a Y pipe or a test pipe, you're going to have problems sometimes with leaks because they were not designed in the same factory as the original exhaust components. I know what you're thinking now. You're going to say, hey, well, they got the original exhaust component and they mashed it up perfectly to the flange to, let's say, this catalytic converter right here. But even though that's true, it was not designed in the same plant. You're talking about different machinery, different engineers. So even though they've tried their best to match it up to the exact same dimensions as the original components, they're not going to be exactly the same as the factory components. And that's where we run into small leaks around our mating surfaces. So now I'm going to show you how to break these two bolts on your catalytic converter loose. These very notorious bolts, they're extremely hard to get to. You actually can't access these from underneath the car, so you have to come through the engine bay, and here's one of them here on the passenger side. And we're going to be running a very long extension through the engine bay, and then we'll be able to break these loose from the engine bay side. And the problem here is that you have quite a few hoses, and you also have some wiring that you have to kind of thread your extension through to get there, but it's not that bad, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do it here in a minute. And the good news is on the driver's side, it's a lot easier because all we have to do is remove this intake and filter, and we have a clean shot right at that bolt, and it makes it extremely easy compared to the passenger side. So we're going to go ahead and start with the driver's side exhaust manifold first. Make sure before you start anything that you disconnect the negative battery cable, because we're going to have to disconnect the mass airflow sensor, as you see me doing right here, which comes off very easily, and two of the O2 sensors down below. And we definitely don't want your ECU to see that, so make sure that you disconnect that cable first. Now that I've got this disconnected, I'm going to tuck it out of the way, and now we can go ahead and remove the filter in the intake tube, and then we'll have clear access to the bolt on the exhaust manifold. Now that I've got this intake tube removed from the throttle body, all I have to do is just slide it up top. I don't have to disconnect that tube that's connected to the valve cover. And now we have clear access to the top bolt on the exhaust manifold. Now, before we start breaking any bolts loose, make sure you spray everything down with some penetrating oil. I like to spray it on there and let it sit for at least an hour before I break anything loose. These things are exposed to an awful lot of heat, and they tend to fuse sometimes, and then that's what causes them to snap, and that's the last thing you really want is a snap bolt. So make sure you give it a little penetrating oil first. So now you see we have clear access to that hard to get to bolt on the exhaust manifold right there, and we're going to go ahead now and break this loose. So let's talk about the extension real quick. I'm using 1/2-inch extension. You can see I've got 2 pieces here, and the fewer pieces the better. I happen to have this long 20-inch piece, so it came out to about 29 inches. As long as you have between 27 and 29 inches, you should have more than enough length to access that bolt. So let's go ahead and break this loose. You can see I've got an extended socket here for even more reach. I really didn't need that though, because I've got more than enough extension here. And honestly, you could probably get away with a 1-piece 20-inch extension and maybe an extended socket to break this loose. You can see my ratchet sticking way out of the engine bay here, so I could get a lot closer if I needed to. And that penetrating oil really worked great here. Don't skip that step, because it wasn't that hard at all to break this bolt loose. Now let's tackle the passenger side. The only reason it's a little more difficult is because of these hoses, and it's just not a straight clear shot, but just watch where I thread this extension through, and you can, as long as you're in the same vicinity, you should be able to get access as well. So it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I was able to get it right on there pretty easily here, and once again, that penetrating oil really made it easy to break these loose. You can see it wasn't that much trouble at all. Yours may be a little bit harder to break loose, but definitely use some penetrating oil here. Now that we've got those bolts broken loose, we can go underneath and remove this brace that attaches to the catalytic converters here, and that just keeps them nice and stable and keeps the vibration down. You can see that this bolts into the frame itself right here, and the other ends bolt to the catalytic converters. Once you get that off, we can go ahead and attack the rest of the bolts. So let's crawl underneath here and take a look real quick. There's just 2 bolts from the test pipes here to the Y pipe, and I think it's a 17 and a 14 is what you're going to need to break those 2 loose, and then get both sides obviously, and then you can zip tie your Y pipe up to that little transmission brace right there, and that'll keep them nice and sturdy up there and out of your way. And then once we got those 4 bolts broken loose, we can detach our O2 sensor, and it's pretty easy to remove. You just push the tab down and they slide out, not too difficult. And then we have 2 bolts on each side of the header to get to. And this bottom bolt's really easy to access, that's easy to get out, but that one on top up there, you're going to need that 20-inch extension to get to that one here, and I'll kind of briefly go over that in a minute. But yeah, just these 4 bolts and the O2 sensors and the other side of the Y pipe, and we can pull these test pipes out of the vehicle. So now we have that bolt that's hard to get to. I'm going to show you how I did it real quick. I used the 20-inch extension, and I also use a extended socket on the end right here, as you can see, and that gave me just enough length to get up there and break that loose. So that wasn't too difficult as long as you have the correct extension. And now we can remove the test pipes. Now, as I remove this last bolt from the Y pipe to the test pipe, you can see these 2 gaskets I've got here, and that was my attempt to try to make a leak-free system. Last time I installed these test pipes, still wasn't enough. I still had some condensation leaking between the Y pipe and the test pipe, so this new ultra copper gasket maker should solve all these problems. And now that I got that bolt out, we can go ahead and remove the test pipe here, and just be careful. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses. I don't know if you saw that, but boom, out came a little bolt and it just missed my head. So you want to protect your eyes here. Now, it's a good idea to go ahead and inspect any exhaust components before you reinstall any new hardware or gaskets. So let's check out the flange here, and boom, right off the bat, I can see a nice huge crack right down the center of this weld here. And this is the flange that mates up to the actual header, and I'm sure that gets quite a lot of vibration here. I've heard about people complaining about cracks with their Motordyne ART pipes. I've never actually seen one in person until now, but the good news is that this thing has a 2-year warranty, and I'm right around 2 years old with this component, so I could probably have this shipped back and replaced or repaired. I'm not sure what they're going to want to do here, but I really don't want to wait for them to replace it. I'd like to get this exhaust reassembled today, and I do know a place called Newt's Exhaust and Welding in Pelham, Alabama, which is about 30 minutes away from where I live. So let's go on a road trip and see if we can get this exhaust repaired today. So I figured out pretty quickly after I got a look at Newt's shop that he really knew what he was doing. He had about every tool you could possibly use to fabricate and repair any type of exhaust. So I brought both my test pipes down so we could take a look at the damaged side versus the good side. And then I took a little look at this beauty right over here, and I could not believe my eyes. A 1968 Pontiac Firebird. Now, Phil told me this was the very first car he bought when he was just 16 years old back in 1978. You can see he's kept this thing in immaculate condition. He's completely redone the entire car. Everything has been replaced. We're talking the interior, 6-speed transmission, all new gauges, big fat beefy tires, custom gas tank in the rear. I mean, the engine's insane. Big block V8, and you can see there's not a single stock component on this engine. Everything has been completely redone. Over the years, he spent over $200,000 restoring this car to exactly the way he wants it, and he's got this thing dynoed out at 658 horsepower, so you can bet this thing is one screamer on the road. I'd love to take a ride in this thing. So now we're going to go ahead and see if we can get these welds fixed on my test pipe here, and I can't wait to see what he's going to do with this TIG welder. As Phil was repairing the welds on my test pipe, he told me he thought the main problem for the failure was that the gauge of steel used in these test pipes was just too thin. You need a thicker gauge steel when it comes to a test pipe, because you're dealing with a lot of vibration coming off the headers, and that can cause a failure in the welds. But you can see he was able to repair these TIG welds, and they look great. Now I don't have to wait for replacement test pipe to come in the mail, and I can go ahead and reassemble my exhaust today. So I was very happy. Very reasonable price, $45 for this repair. You can't beat that deal. So if you're in the Birmingham area, definitely check out Newt's Exhaust and Welding. You won't be disappointed. This guy does a bang up great job. My hat's off to you. Thanks, Phil. So I briefly want to show you an alternative to the Motordyne Art Pipe, and this is a Megan Racing test pipe that I bought for my 2006 Honda Accord. Now this thing is way stout. It's super thick. I'd say it's twice as thick, if not more, than the Motordyne Art Pipes. I'm not saying that the Motordyne art pipes are not high quality. I'm just saying this thicker gauge steel here is going to be less prone to having cracked welds. Now that we know that the gauge of steel used on the Motordyne art pipes is just maybe a little too thin, I think this would be a better alternative than the Motordyne art pipes, and I can't wait to put this into my Honda Accord. These welds are really nice, and you can see the flanges here are super stout, very thick, and I'm very impressed with this. So this would probably be a good alternative if you don't want to run Motordyne art pipes, since they're prone to fracturing the welds here. Now it's time to show you the secret weapon on getting a leak-free aftermarket or OEM exhaust, and that's this ultra copper gasket maker from Permatex. This stuff's awesome. It's rated up to 700 degrees Fahrenheit, and in conjunction with brand new hardware and brand new gaskets, this should make our exhaust leak-free every single time, whether you're working on aftermarket parts or OEM parts. So I'm going to walk you through how to use this stuff correctly. So before we can use the gasket maker, we need to prepare the surfaces that are going to be mated up, and this is the header, and I first ran a little 400 grit sandpaper to remove a little bit of rust that had accumulated, and now I'm wiping it down with some 91% rubbing alcohol. And what that does is it cleans the surface and leaves it residue free, and it dries really quickly here. So make sure that your surfaces are dry and clean before we use the gasket maker. I'm doing the same thing over here with my Y pipe, just wiping it down, making sure that it's clean and dry. So as you're applying your gasket maker, make sure you use a nice thick bead. You can see I've got a nice thick bead here, and also encircle the bolt holes. You can see I've went around each of the bolt holes here, and that is recommended by the manufacturer. So once you get that completed, you can go ahead and throw your metal gasket on top of that. You don't have to wait very long. It gets tacky very quickly here, and it's so tacky I can go ahead and place this gasket on, and it kind of sticks to it there. And I've gone ahead now at this point and put gasket maker on both sides of my test pipe. So I'll have the metal gasket in the center with gasket maker on either side of this metal gasket here. So I'm going to go ahead now at this point and place my test pipe into position, and then we're going to get our new hardware and bolt it down. Now we're not going to bolt it all the way down to spec. We're just going to tighten it up slightly and let it rest for about 1 hour. At this point, the manufacturer wants you to tighten the bolts as much as you can to get it stable, but not torque it to spec. We would need to wait for exactly 1 hour, and then we're going to torque all the bolts down to spec at that point. And that is what Permatex recommends for the very best possible seal. Now, Permatex recommends that you wait for 24 hours after you torque everything to spec before you start your engine. So I know it's a long time to wait, but if you want a leak-free exhaust, it's best to go by their recommendations. Now that it's been 24 hours, I've gone ahead and started my engine, and now I'm going to go ahead and check for exhaust leaks. First thing I'm going to do here is look for condensation right here where the Y pipe meets the test pipe, and I don't see anything at all. I'm going to go ahead and cup my hand around this flange area and see if I can feel any leaks at all, and I do not feel anything, so that's great. I've got a nice perfect seal here. I'm going to check the other side as well for leaks, and you can see that the gasket maker has squeezed out there and is feeling great. No leaks whatsoever found, so I'm pretty happy with that. And I've gone right by the recommendations, and everything seems to be working great now at this point. So now all we have left to do is check the mating surface from the header to the test pipe, and you need to be very careful once you get your hands up in this area. Sorry it's a little bit dark here, but that is right there where the test pipe meets the header. Just stick your hand up there and be very careful, because it's kind of a cramped area and those headers are very hot, so you don't want to burn yourself. But I'm happy to tell you that I had no leaks at all here, so very happy with the seal that the Permatex gasket maker made, and now we are completely leak-free here. So if this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a big old thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Come on, join the Z-Speed team. And until next time, you know what to do. Just keep on repairing.